Welcome to the Sencast. My name is Dale Pickles, Managing Director of B Squared and the host of the Sencast. If you are a new listener, then welcome to the Sencast. The aim of the Sencast is really simple. We want to reach lots and lots of people and help everyone learn more about special educational needs and disability. On this week's episode, we discussed navigating Ofsted's new framework and what you need to know for SEND. And my guest this week was Adam Sproston, a senior His Majesty's Inspector for SEND, AP and Inclusion. And before joining Ofsted, Adam gained extensive school improvement and senior leadership experience in primary schools, including specially resourced provision. He has also worked at local authority level in both early years and SEND strategic leadership, and Adam holds an MPQH and a National Award for SEND coordination. The Sencast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. We are the assessment people. We are known for showing those small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And over the last few years, we've been creating an inclusive assessment system that can be used with all pupils in a primary school. It has different levels of detail for different levels of ability, but it means you can show progress from a starting point for every pupil, and you can also identify those gaps in knowledge. And of course, using one assessment system for all pupils reduces teacher workload. We have new features around with AI to simplify report writing, and our analysis platform helps you understand the data for all of your pupils. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me to take you through the software and what it can do for you. Now, let's get on with this podcast. My guest this week is Adam Sproston, a senior His Majesty's Inspector for SEND, AP and Inclusion. Before joining Ofsted, Adam gained extensive school improvement and senior leadership experience in primary schools, including specialist resource provision. He has also worked at a local authority level in both early years and SEND strategic leadership, and Adam holds an NPQH and the National Award for SEND coordination. He leads inspections of primary, special and independent schools, and Adam also leads and quality assures SEND area inspections. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Dale. Thanks for the great introduction.
It's written by you, and it's one of those things you're going, you're quite busy, I'm guessing.
Quite a busy person, but love the job.
Great. So we're at the start of a new Ofsted inspection framework. At the time of recording, just before Christmas. We're about a month in, just over. And as always, no one likes change, and the changes made, not everyone agrees with. But for me, there is a lot of positivity around SEND. We've seen this coming throughout the year as it was announced in January, what's coming. I've seen a lot of positivity. And out of all the documents released or reports released this year by the government, this is the one that's actually going to have an immediate positive impact for pupils with SEND.
Yeah, definitely, Dale. Thanks for the praise there on the work that we've done, and for the purposes of the SENDcast today, of course, we're focusing on those children with SEND, but we really have put inclusion at the heart of this work. Inspectors are already out there in schools across early years, as well as schools, colleges, further education settings as well, putting our published documents into practice, and is already having a positive impact on children and young people, which is what we stand for at Ofsted. So it's great for you to have commented on that.
And it is. There's lots of little bits. There is obviously an inclusion area, but that inclusion is wider than SEND.
Yeah.
But that SEND and inclusion is threaded through everything, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. A really important point for you to raise there. So children with SEND have always been a focus of Ofsted's work, but actually the inclusion criteria and what we're looking at inclusion covers 4 broad areas of young people. And you'll see in the published documentation, if your listeners get hold of that and give it a good read, should I say, you'll find in there disadvantaged children, those children that have SEND, and that includes those with an EHC plan and those supported at SEN support, children known or previously known to social care. So they're the main three groups, and we focused on those children because we know that they face increased barriers to their learning and well-being, and we want to try and shift that dial through this framework and what we do as an inspectorate working in partnership with leaders. But a fourth important group that we might touch on today a little bit is actually children who face other barriers to learning and well-being that don't neatly fit a box, or haven't been accepted by certain agencies, and yet schools are working day in, day out to improve things for those children and their families as well. So we want to value that work and get under the skin of it as well.
So one broad sweeping statement I'm going to make, and you can tell me if it's wrong or not, is if a school fails, or whatever the correct terminology, I'm going to say fails Ofsted, fails their inspection, or because of SEND, I'm going to say you cannot pin that on the SENCO anymore. That is a whole school failure, not the failure of the SENCO.
Yeah, so we're really, really mindful of working carefully with leaders in schools and other settings as well that we inspect and regulate. And actually what this has shifted us to focus on is inclusion at a whole school level. And previously it was never a pinning on the SENCO. I've got to be honest, and at times when we leave areas for improvement around SEND, we're very, very mindful, we always have been when we're sharing that final feedback with those responsible for governance, senior leaders as well, how evidence is pulled together across the whole inspection. And we never comment on individual teaching in lessons. We see what things are typically like across a school. So that rule always stands, and we've never pinned anything. I completely understand, once we leave the site,
once you leave the site,
what might happen, and so-and-so might say that this was said, that was said, and the other. But what this has shifted us to thinking about is actually that inclusion is more than just those children and young people with SEND. It's about the whole school approaches to identifying barriers, many of which might lead individual teachers and leaders to think about, does a child have particular needs that need to be addressed through a graduated approach? But actually it's more than that. It's thinking about children with social care barriers, who's being signposted to what services and how well is that going. But actually there might be other contexts that we want to find out about. Schools might be working to support their communities, I don't know what I was going to say, to defend against knife crime, not quite the right terminology, is it? But to educate their
Yes.
children and young people to be prepared for what they might face out there when they become adults. And there might be a junior leader that's leading that project that we might meet with in the inclusion meeting, for example. So we'll be working closely with senior leaders to determine who to meet with. An interesting change is probably always going to be the SENCO, but before there was typically going to be just a SENCO meeting, and I think the importance, Dale, here is that we're casting that net a bit wider. So, the SENCO's highly likely to be involved in conversations about inclusion, but it is also highly likely that they're going to bring in other colleagues, if they're available in the school, such as the person who's responsible for pupil premium, and looking at strategies that support. And in most schools there's going to be a natural overlap there in some of their work, and we'll seek to explore how that's working with children on the ground.
And that's the thing, I think it is very much, if I have heard that Ofsted were blaming, I'm sorry. It was, I think, when it's left, and it's like, oh, we failed on SEND, and someone sees SEND and then the word SENCO, it's like, well, it's your fault. And for me, everything about the new Ofsted inspection, all the way through the bit around inclusion, it's just leaders. It's everywhere. And that's the bit I'm really trying to make, because I think a lot of SENCOs, whether it's said in the post-Ofsted inspection, it's kind of, they are made to feel, and I see this quite a bit, that SENCOs either feel it's on them, and even with the new inspection framework coming in, I've seen lots of SENCOs going, oh, even more for me to do, even more responsibility, and I'm going, no, this one's really supporting you. This one's, to me, Meaning it's not all on you. It is across. It's that leadership around SEND is distributed across all leaders.
Exactly. We've really tried to focus on that. There are standards, we'll touch on those shortly, I'm sure, but, that do focus on the SENCO and ensuring that colleague has sufficient ability to make a difference for children and young people. But actually, it all comes back to leadership of the school. And leadership can be on a local level, it can be on a classroom level, but it's always about leaders and how they work together with those responsible for governance, the leadership and management of the school, and actually how everybody together is seeking to improve things for children and young people, and that widening of who we're focusing on. We've always looked at children that face barriers, but actually we've explained quite clearly now that might be the colleague that's responsible for looked after children.
Yeah.
That colleague might come along to that conversation as well, and it's a joint effort to using resources, using evidence-informed approaches to support children as best we can.
And also, when you're having a conversation with the English lead about progress in English, you're not going to turn halfway through and ask the SENCO, and what about SEND?
Yeah.
That is all the responsibility of the English lead.
Yeah. Well, it's when we meet with a group of leaders, we might meet with... so just to clarify, deep dives have gone, so they're no more. So we're not looking at evaluating through the lens of a subject. However, we are likely to still look at a suite of subjects collectively, working with leaders when we notify the inspection. What would they like to celebrate with us? What are aspects that the leaders think need further improvement? And in most schools there will always be a focus, particularly in primary settings, on English and mathematics and how they're laying the foundations for future learning for children. And in those meetings where we meet with groups of subject leaders, we are likely to ask about SEND, and it would be a bit odd if at that point we rolled the SENCO in and that colleague took over the conversation. It's how do they know how for all the children I've mentioned previously, disadvantaged children, children with SEND, those known to social care, how well are they faring through their curriculum? How are assessment tools working for those children? They might say, Dale, well, it's all the same for everybody, and it works pretty well for us in our school, and that might be okay. They might say, oh, well, actually, we've thought about tweaking the curriculum for our disadvantaged children because, in particular, we found many of them have experienced trauma in their early lives, and we'll explore that with them as well. So there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, but it's definitely not wheeling the SENCO into those meetings either.
And that's the thing, I think, over the years, every time the Ofsted inspections frameworks change, it's gone to much more of a conversation. I think, remember years ago, people are going, what's the expected Ofsted lesson? And almost asking you, where should I stand in the classroom? How long should I speak to? What is Ofsted wanting? It's like... And basically what you want is, there is no guidance around that. It is what is effective for your pupils.
Yeah, knowing yourself well, knowing your pupils. Importantly, what has come back as very positive feedback, we did a number of pilots, test visits as well on this new approach, and actually working closely with senior leaders throughout the inspection. So they will escort us on learning walks to see what day-to-day school life is like. That has come across incredibly well, because we've all been teachers who work for Ofsted, who inspect for Ofsted, and there'll always be a point of the lesson where you think, oh, I wish she was in for this bit, or somebody will walk into your lesson and you'll go, oh, I wish you didn't walk in at that point. But actually, it's about a conversation, a professional conversation with both the teacher that you did walk in on and actually that senior leader who's escorting you. Is that what you expected before I walked into that lesson? And we're all well aware, especially in specialist settings and in schools when you're working with children with SEND, has the taxi been late? Has something gone on before we walked in that's caused that? Or is this typically what it's like? And that might be the case, but there might be a plan of action that over time will support that child. So we're all open conversations, dialogue, and working with professionals in a professional manner.
My wife went back to teaching recently. And I don't think it wasn't Ofsted, but it was like one of those pretend Ofsted inspections. And it was in a specialist setting. And she kind of prepped the class. And we had some people coming in there like, but we don't like people. And as soon as they heard someone outside the classroom door, like 2 kids barricaded the door so no one could get in. And it's one of those things you kind of, you don't, it happens.
Yeah, it does happen.
And the fact it's happened is not probably the biggest issue. It's the conversation afterwards of how and the why and what are you doing, how are you supporting. That is the bit that wins or loses it. That's the bit.
Yeah, and it's always seeking to work with providers. Are there any particular young people, classes in particular, that you would like us to, pay due regard to? Inspectors received significant training about adaptations, but also what we can do at times. We'll always seek to work with children individually on their own without adults, just to work and advocate for them and listen to their views where appropriate. But at times, I've gone into specialist settings and there's 8 in a class, and the head teacher has said, it'd be great if you could take 6 of them out, and of course that leaves 2 in the classroom who aren't very happy on the day that they've been left out. Now the head teacher worked with me and thought, it's typical this, Adam, we really thought those 2 would love staying in the classroom and wouldn't want to come and meet with you. So simple solution, I went to the classroom and met with all 8 of them, and it was done and dusted. But you can never tell until the moment, can you, at times? No. And that's because we're dealing with little humans, and we're all very unique.
Yes. And you touched on there that you've been trialling this approach, I think, throughout the autumn term.
Yeah. And before then, yes, yeah.
I've seen a few people kind of telling us how our trial inspection went. And most of them have been really, really positive. Yet the one I see in the news is the one person ranting about how much extra work it is. And as always, that's the one that gets the notice. That's the one, it kind of, not liking Ofsted is quite popular in education. So that's the one which rises to the top. Yet I've seen so many more which are really, really positive. So for listeners, if you have seen the negative one about the new inspection framework, how much more tougher it is and ongoing and more stressful, I've read a lot more saying how positive and how much more supportive and how much it was less judgmental and more collaborative than previous inspection frameworks. So don't just go on one person's social media or style information. Find people who've actually been through the framework, where you can really understand their point of view.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Dale. There's lots of comments out there on social media. I try and avoid them if I can, but we are committed to still tweaking things, listening, reflecting, and making this process the best it can be. Personally, the feedback that I've been hearing has been positive, particularly around that collaboration, particularly around discussing individual context straight away, finding out about the challenges that leaders face in schools and how that is mitigated where possible onto the children and the impact that it has on them and their families. We've done lots to try and mitigate workload and, I don't know what the exact wording was you used there. It's a lot more for us to do. Interestingly, in the toolkits, everything that's around that expected standard is in statutory guidance. So all of those standards have come out of statutory guidance, and we don't expect anybody to make anything for us. It should be the work that schools are doing day to day that is enshrined in that guidance that is out there. We've thought really carefully as well about what we call the tariff, so how many inspectors for how many days schools are going to have, and have smoothed that to take workload off of providers, and where possible, of course, if we're seeing things that are aligning with the self-evaluation of the school, we share that early doors with leaders. At times we'll say to colleagues, I think we've got enough on that aspect. Does everybody agree? Yes, they do. but it's also our job as well where we highlight things that aren't aligning with their self-evaluation, that we share that in a professional way early doors, so there's other opportunities around the corner to gather more evidence if appropriate.
So if we go on to the new 5-point scale,
Yeah.
so it's no longer outstanding, you have a very aspirational exceptional at the top.
Yeah.
And you're expecting a few schools to get that.
Yeah, so exceptional is exactly what it says in the descriptors there. It is about absolutely exceptional practice for that evaluation area. So I'll touch on how the whole thing sits together really, Dale, as well. So you've mentioned the word outstanding then. That's gone now. We've got new words as well as a new approach. So we used to have an overall effectiveness, and you'll know that we moved away from having that to provide greater nuance, because schools, if we focus on schools for the purposes of this podcast and your audience, but all educational settings are incredibly complex. So what we've committed to is a 5-point scale. We've got exceptional, strong standard, the expected standard, we have needs attention, we have urgent improvement, and within those 5 we then have all of the evaluation areas as well. So for each evaluation area, what we are expecting to see is more of a nuanced grade profile. So for example, if we think about curriculum and teaching, that might be strong from the evidence that's gathered. Attendance and behaviour, that might not be strong. That might be somewhere else on the scale, and that's for inspectors to gather the evidence working alongside leaders and to explain how that grade has emerged, and then to firm up that grade and explain the rationale for it to leaders on the inspection. Importantly, that provides parents and carers in particular with an improved understanding about where the school is at in its different evaluation areas, and we are expecting to see that more nuanced profile throughout our work. You talked there about exceptional, and your listeners can, I didn't say readers that time, I nearly did. Your listeners can find all of the information in the really transparent toolkits that we've published. Now, exceptional is achievable, and it's for inspectors to work with providers, but you are right, that exceptionality needs to be there, and we've used words such as transformational impact on the pupils at the school, and we'll seek to explore that. But something else I'll touch on, which brings greater consistency, clarity to our work, is in the old framework, if we call it that, we used to have good and requires improvement sitting in the middle. And they were always based on evidence, but it was the lead inspector's role, working with the team and leaders, to use the evidence to inform where that outcome lay. So would it sit in good, or would it sit in requires improvement? But now what we have done is we're doing a secure fit model. So for the expected standard, those standards have to be met for that to be awarded. So there's no, it's more consistent. Clearer, it's more consistent. And then what we're saying is for that needs to be met before we then look at strong standard, and then we move through to exceptional. And what's vitally important for the purposes of today is throughout all the evaluation areas, we have a sharp focus on children who are disadvantaged, children known to social care, but those children and young people with SEND as well. So how well are attendance and behaviour processes, strategies working for those children as well? And you'll see that when you look at our toolkits.
It's going to be interesting watching how schools use this scale, because if you look, you've got a report card, and basically you end up with these 5 phrases, and it's how many dots in each of them gives you that profile, that score.
Yeah.
And I wonder how many people will say, and again, there probably will be a school which gets exceptional across all the areas, and they'll say, we've been judged as exceptional by Ofsted. It's like, okay, there's no such thing as an overall judgment. Then you might get another one who gets one score up there and says, we've been judged as exceptional, because you can't say they haven't. So that's going to be an interesting how schools, some schools churn that up. But one of the bits I want to focus on, which we did a session with Gary Orbit on Zencast Sessions, and we had a chat previously about this, that needs attention. That is a softer sounding phrase than requires improvement. And I think there is an exception of more schools to be in that zone, because I think partly it's a secure fit, and also in everyone's lives there's always something that needs attention. So if a school gets judged as it needs attention, it's a to-do list. It's not, to me, a negative. It's just you do not have the evidence there to make it a secure, expected standard. It's not a failing. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, really focused on trying to shift that terminology and the culture behind it as well. And you will have heard senior leaders in Ofsted talking about needs attention, being a little bit like when your car goes in for an MOT and there's a few advisory bits. If you don't act on this, it may cause a bit of a puzzle further down the line. So that's what we're trying to shift that narrative towards around needs attention. Importantly, we're a great part of the accountability system. We're respected, we're valued, but we are one part of that accountability system. And so inspections are a point-in-time evaluation of where a school sits when me and my colleagues turn up. And that's for us to work with leaders on, where are you at today, but also thinking about what schools do in the round for children and young people. And actually there's always going to be something for a school to work on. Where they then sit on the grading scale is a bit of a different conversation, but the vast majority of schools will always say to inspectors, you know, we think we're there for the majority of children. We'd quite like to tweak this curriculum for some of our looked after cohort that haven't performed particularly well in recent times, and that's for a professional conversation with the inspector on the ground and to see where that goes.
And that's the thing I want to focus on again. There's what Ofsted says and how everyone interprets it and how everyone uses it. And I just want to be really clear that you are expecting, and it's not a real big concern if they're in needs attention. It is, cool, you're here, couple of things you need to tweak and you'll get there. And then basically what you're saying is, at that point in time, like your MOT, you've got a couple of advisories, which means by the next MOT you probably should do them. That is giving that school a list of, this is the bits you need to work on, and they can then use that to say, Ofsted said this, we are doing this to do this. Exactly. And that's what you want, is using the inspection to go, right, this is what we need to do. That should be going to school improvement plan. It's not urgent, because there's a level called urgent improvement, but it is something that maybe that practice is inconsistent, or perhaps there is no evidence of it being that consistent, but it's not urgent. And it's not a hammer to hit people with.
Exactly, and we have focused on shifting that approach to focus on that. And I think you raise a good point there about the secure fit. I mean, expected standard is a high bar, and it's the expected standard. And then we also need to play due regard to how strong is. You know, strong is strong, and that should be celebrated. And so we'll be working with the sector to do that.
So one of the bits that I personally really like in the inspection framework is there's a lot of talk about progress from starting point. Now, personally, for me, this is something that's been missing for 10 years since introduction of the primary curriculum, and the phrasing of below or working towards has become quite a norm. And when a school sends information, we need an EHCP, where are they working below? And it generally, in lots of those situations, there's ineffective planning, not really about to talk about progress, not sure what those next. And to me, we've been failing those children for a long time. So the fact I see that in the Ofsted inspection framework, I absolutely love. And I know it means not only from where were they last year to where are they today, but when we're starting this topic, when we're doing this section of work, what are their gaps? What is it that needs filling?
Yeah,
What do you need to address? What's that extra attention going into? And that for me means all pupils will have really good assessment so you can meet their needs.
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely. It comes down to identifying gaps in pupils' day-to-day knowledge. What's going on to plug those gaps? Now, for some children and young people, there might be huge gaps in their knowledge across the curriculum because they've had poor educational experiences before they've arrived at that school. That's for us to explore on the ground. We've heard awful stories. Children that have been in 5, 6, 7 schools and arrive at a school in year 10. So we need to work out what's it's really important that we value that child's experience and the challenges it brings to them, but also the challenges it brings to that school, and what are they going to shift towards the focus on, and work with the provider to find out, well, what are you trying to plug in Adam's gaps, for example? How are you doing that? Are you working closely with parents, carers and other professionals to do that? For most children and young people, we'll be focusing on how well they achieve academically, exam qualifications, looking at that information alongside leaders. But for children with SEND in particular, we're always focused on, as you say, gaps and progress from starting points, and the only way inspectors get under the skin of that is working and gathering first-hand evidence with professionals. And it might be that we've worked with the provider and we find that some children have just missed a couple of bits of essential knowledge, let's say in science, and there's intervention and support that goes in that plugs that important piece of knowledge, and therefore children and young people fly from that point. It might be that some children and young people, because of their needs, need a completely different approach to curriculum, assessment and teaching, and that might be in a mainstream school. We're going to find those children more commonly in specialist settings, but maybe not, Dale, as you know. You might have children and young people with very complex needs in mainstream schools, and that is fantastic. They're welcomed, they're included. But we may expect that those leaders have had to think carefully about the curriculum they've got in place for that young person. They might have a slightly different assessment framework for them, and we'll work closely to work out how well that's working for that individual child as well.
Definitely. And with that, you mentioned interventions. So if we think about the APDR cycle, and there are local authorities who are trying not to do EHC needs assessment without 2 cycles of APDR, and it's not legal, but never mind, we're going to move past that. But that APDR, what I often find is schools are rushing to the doing. They're trying to get an intervention. They're asking can anyone recommend a writing intervention, without really identifying those gaps and what actually the intervention is trying to kind of meet. What are gaps? What are those missing skills you're trying to meet and teach? That's what you really should be. And I think, again, there's a whole bit around the effectiveness of the APDR cycles and monitoring that as a leaders, not the SENCO, leaders. So that'd be the English lead, looking at those AP. And I love the fact that actually, again, the effectiveness, it's not about doing them. It's not about we've done 2 cycles of APDR,
Exactly.
EHC and a conveyor belt. It's they need to be effective.
Yeah, exactly. So, 2-pronged answer here. So first of all, we'll stick on the lens of the school. What you'll find in the toolkits is lots of useful information before you get to those grading rows, and that's essential because it will talk to you about what evidence inspectors will gather.
Yep.
Now, assess, plan, do, review, vitally important, but importantly very different in different schools. And it's not for us. We don't have a one-size-fits-all. We don't have a preferred style at Ofsted. So it's for leaders, not just the SENCO, to talk to us about how they're employing whole school strategies, how they're individualising things for children where appropriate, and how well are those things working. So by things, I might mean teaching in individual lessons, I might mean intervention, I might mean some package that they've bought into at a whole school level. But we will seek to explore how that's working typically, day to day, who's it not working for, and what you're doing about that. And that could be the careers programme, it could be sex education programme. Is somebody needing a different approach, and why is that? But you bring up a vitally important point, and we do find this, that sometimes you'll hear of, oh, so-and-so employee, so-and-so's using this intervention, so we're going to pick it up, we're going to bring it into my school, launch it today, and it's going to be great. Now, there are things there are typical things, aren't there, that will work for all children and young people. So we could talk about this for hours, but, improving children's communication skills. Well, if we get something that does that, it's probably going to work well for most children. Having robust routines and high expectations, they're probably going to have a sharp focus on driving up standards for all children. But actually, are you having fidelity to the scheme? Are you doing things as it says on the tin? And where you're not doing that, is that because you've identified through assessment that some children need a different approach? And it's about that knowledge, really. How are we addressing gaps in knowledge, and upskilling teachers to meet that at a quality first teaching level, as I would say, in the classroom. And you'll find bits throughout the toolkit, such as the evaluation of the pupil premium strategy. How well is that going? What's the impact on children? Professional expertise as well, Dale, is in there. So if you've got a growing cohort, let's say SEMH needs, we could pin that further. We could say, oh, it's actually the older girls in our school that we're finding are experiencing social, emotional and mental health difficulties. So how has your approach to upskilling your staff flex to meet those children's needs? And that's a conversation that we would have. But lots of things in there that can hook onto inclusion and SEND.
And it's very much what works in school A doesn't always work in school B.
Exactly.
It's one part of a cog. It's one cog you've lifted out of that. It's not necessarily going to fit into your school.
Exactly. And just building on that, you can have evidence-informed approaches that, I've been a teacher, and we've had every professional working around this child or family, and everybody thinks it's going to work. And you get a couple of weeks in and it's not working. So you just need to think on your feet. Again, work closely with parents and carers, and inspectors will seek to explore, is it working for everybody? No. So what do you do that's different for those children, and how do you know it is working?
That's the thing. It's if you notice this amazing intervention that everyone recommends isn't working, change it. Don't just keep going because apparently it's going to work. That's kind of you. If it's not working, why keep doing it?
Yeah. And just something else that's in the toolkits. We've never put remove barriers in the toolkits. Now, some of the barriers you can remove. Many of those barriers, as schools, we can only reduce them, and that's by having quality first teaching in place, strong strategies that you think will work for children and young people, and keeping an oversight on how they are working. But there are some barriers as well that are outside of schools' control, such as, homelessness that sadly some children and families face. Schools can only do so much, signposting, supporting the child when they're in their care, for example. But that's important as well to just reflect on, I think.
So one of the quotes I've got from the inspection framework on page 29 under the achievement section, and the quote is, consider starting points and the progress made from them. Inspectors also want to understand the curriculum pathways of individuals or groups and whether the leaders have identified the right priorities for them and are ensuring they are making good progress. And to me that's a really powerful thing, because the curriculum pathways of individuals or groups, and when we think of EHCPs, that often provides a kind of an additional part of the curriculum which aren't covered by your typical curriculum. And to me, that really gives schools that permission and actually that expectation of you need to meet the needs of these EHCPs. They are the priorities. These are some of these barriers which are going to impact them in their life, and that's what we need to be reducing. And that is sometimes more important than English and maths and other areas. And I think that's a really powerful paragraph where it's telling people what is right for this child, because that's what you should be doing.
Yeah, it's about best interests of the child. We've always said that, and actually, it's any child that might need a different approach. It's enshrined in what we've written in the toolkits now. We want to find out what that approach is and the rationale for it. At times, we might find that the rationale hasn't been well thought out, and that's for us to have a conversation about. And there could be millions of examples as to what this could cover, but it could be a child that's recently started at the school, that there's no previous experience or previous knowledge of, no assessment information has come over. Well, actually, the school might need to get the skates on at that point to understand that child's needs. But actually it might be about a different curriculum. We'd always want to have the end in mind, which would be a return to mainstream possibly, or a return to the main school. But it's not for us to fly in and say, well, that's wrong for those children. It's to find out why was the rationale used for them. Let's say they're in the school's nest provision, hub provision or something. We'd want to find out, well, why was that approach used, and how well do you think it's going, leaders?
And that's the important bit. It isn't a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
For many children, what it won't be is individual interventions throughout the day, ongoing, constant.
Yeah.
It's why are they not with their peers?
Yeah.
Why are they not in their classroom? The teacher is always going to be the best person to there are so many things. So it's, as you said, it's the why. How did you come to this decision? Why was this the best interest?
This is, yeah. I didn't do my second prong answer, actually,
No,
Dale.
you didn't.
Just
You didn't.
reminded
I jumped
me.
on.
No.
Jumped
You've
off.
reminded me when you've mentioned EHCs. So actually, on a school level, we're always interested to looking at EHCs for those children who have them. But that has to also come with a bit of a caveat that we do understand that the quality of EHCs is typically led by the local authority. And we'll work with leaders on that. So if we know that at times they're not good enough, the quality of EHC plans, so we'll work with leaders. Well, what are you using to ensure that your staff have systems in place to understand what Adam's needs are? If you're telling us that this EHC plan is 3, I mean, I've seen them 4 or 5 years out of date, Dale. So working with leaders on a day-to-day level, what assessment information, anecdotal information, understanding of Adam's strengths, but also the needs and barriers that he faces in school, what you're using as a school to try and get under that skin. And my second part of the answer was going to get to, we work really closely with Care Quality Commission, and we run area SEND inspections. And they're led by Education HMI, working in partnership with CQC, but also colleagues from Ofsted Social Care, because we come together to evaluate what things are like for children and young people with SEND in an area, and looking at how social care, health work closely with education to ensure children get high quality outcomes. And that is where we find issues typically with education healthcare plan, either timeliness, pathways, or the quality that they end up with at the end of the process. So we understand that's not a school's duty as such, but we do want to see what documentation, professional advice individual leaders and teachers are using for those pupils on the ground. So
Definitely.
Sorry to have jumped on from that, yeah.
No, I literally, there's bits I could focus on, and the only bit I really want to cover, again, because what I like with this podcast is, I'm generally, the person listening to me right now is probably going to be the Senko, who's probably just hurt their neck from nodding a lot already, but they know that actually what's probably going to come along is someone's going to blame them. And what I'm really trying to do as much as possible is help them see that SEND is not one person's role. SEND is everybody's business. Every leader is a SEND of SEND.
Yep.
I can roll all those lovely phrases which have been out all the years, and they still, every single one of them applies.
Yeah, definitely.
So when we've got the inclusion area, that's obviously going to cover a lot around SEND and the other groups. Curriculum and teaching, definitely it's in there. Achievement, it's definitely in there. Attendance and behaviour. Mm-hmm. You've got pupils attend well, including those with disadvantage, SEND and so on. Yeah. And again, it's not a case of what are your numbers, it's what are you doing about it.
Exactly. What strategies are working? How do you know? Who are you involving? Parents, carers, other professionals.
And if you have an early years or a sixth form, they're separate areas and they're included in there. And then you've got the leadership and governors. And SEND is everywhere.
Yes, definitely. Throughout everything, we've included those children with SEND and the other groups that you've mentioned, and really want to play a sharp focus on their experiences in school, through the lenses that you've mentioned there. So curriculum and teaching, achievement, of course, safeguarding those children we're going to be thinking about. We always have done, and safeguarding remains top priority, keeping those children safe. And there may need to be different approaches to how those children learn to stay safe themselves, how other professionals are involved in their care plans, for example. And don't forget, of course, about personal development and well-being, that wider offer. Yeah. Are those children receiving rich set of experiences that are appropriate when we consider their needs alongside that offer?
And again, that Senko can't do it all. It really is, and I love hammering this because I still read on social media that this is the Senko's responsibility, or Senko's going, how do I get everyone to listen? And the answer is tell them to listen to this podcast. Yeah. But it is every leader, whatever that role, whether they're the pupil premium, whether they're the person doing external visit, whatever it is.
Exactly, yeah.
SEND is everywhere, and as well as the other disadvantaged group and social care and all that. That is everywhere, and it's not a bolt-on. Yeah. Whereas I think previously inspections, it's kind of could have, almost like you could have got outstanding, maybe not doing too well in SEND, but now to get exceptional across the board, that SEND has to be threaded throughout the school and supported by everyone.
Yeah, and even in expected, Dale, and strong, those children are listed. So things could be strong for nearly everybody in the school, but not the cohort who are SEND, the 10% of children in some schools, and therefore that grade criteria wouldn't be met. So we're really driving things up there, but really want to mirror what you're saying about the Senko. The Senko is a vitally important role in the school, but is the colleague that's pulling together for those children with SEND, and it is everyone's responsibility to think about those children and young people in the work that they do, be it what haven't I mentioned today? Careers programme, I think I have mentioned that actually. The person responsible for that, well, is it working well for those groups that we've mentioned? If it isn't, that's fine. What are you doing about enhancing that experience? Could be one of your subject leaders. Let's think of a subject we've not mentioned today, art and design, maybe. How many children with SEND are doing the subject? How well is it working for them? What are you trying to do to improve your area for children and young people that fit those groups that we've mentioned earlier?
And I'm going to wrap it up with the last little bit of the last statement. So in the expected standard under inclusion, there is a statement that says the qualified Senko has sufficient authority within the leadership structure to make a positive difference for pupils with SEND. And that's a really important thing, yeah? Sometimes I feel the Senko sits over there, away from everyone else, on their own, and they're not really listened to, because, it's the Senko again. And I think quite a few Senkos feel that. And I think it's for leaders to make sure that Senko is supported. When the Senko starts talking, the head teacher shouldn't leave the room, because the Senko's got this. You need to be there listening, supporting, and adding to. And it's leaders who set that authority for the Senko.
Yeah, completely agree. We are working with Senkos on inspection. They're likely to be involved in that inclusion meeting. They're likely to be the people that know the ins and outs of the families and children that we've selected and we're talking through when we're looking at documentation. But actually, hit the nail on the head there. You know, the Senko is a vitally important colleague in schools, and it's for leaders to recognise that and to build their thinking and disseminate SEND across the whole structure, really, and to bring that colleague to life and think about what they're saying and put them forward as the leader for SEND in the school to drive forward improvements for those children and young people.
Excellent, and completely agree. So we're going to wrap it up, and I'm going to thank you for coming on the show, because I always enjoy. It's interesting. I've had conversations with Ofsted, both face to face in schools and whatever, and I've never been told I'm wrong by an Ofsted inspector. It's always I might have misunderstood things, and it's been carefully explained. And that's the thing. I think generally I've always found every person from Ofsted who I've talked to, A, is a human being, B, has been really understanding, and where I've had a misunderstanding or misconception, they've explained how I could be wrong and given examples. So I just want, if you have that Ofsted person coming in, remember they're a human, probably with kids. They've probably been in your situation exactly the same as you. They are a tool. They are not someone here to judge you. They are there to be used to help you.
Exactly, yeah.
Really important.
We've talked, Dale, haven't we, about people going round and say, oh, Ofsted says this, Ofsted says that, which is part of why I'm here today. You'll see other colleagues from Ofsted getting out and about. We've bumped into each other at events, for example, haven't we? And people out in the sector are always better hearing it directly from us, because you get rumours, you get myths, and we're committed to ensuring that this framework has a positive launch and it does what it says on the tin, which is about increased transparency, which is why I'm here today talking to you directly, and to try and put some of those myths to bed as well.
And the last thing to mention is you've sent me a link to your Ofsted's latest Area SEND thematic report.
Aha. Yes, nearly forgot about that. So thanks for raising it. Only it's got launched on the 11th of December. Again, so Ofsted, most of the news around Ofsted comes under schools. We do lots of more work. Lots of work in the early years, a huge sector there. It's vitally important to giving those children the best start in life. Schools, which is my background. Post-16, which is incredibly diverse. You know, you have supported internships, apprenticeships now, lots of options coming up. But something else that we do is lots of work in research and evaluation and thematic reports. One that we've done with CQC, Care Quality Commission, was launched recently, and that's about children with SEND not in school. And so we led 6 visits to different areas of the country, and have produced a report that shines a light, really, that things really do need to improve for those children. And just to explain that, listeners can find that online, the report, the thematic report. What we mean by children with SEND not in school isn't just those that aren't coming to school, but is various other packages that have emerged over time. So you might have heard about flexi-schooling, EOTAS arrangements, electively home-educated children and young people, those that are severely absent from school. So we encapsulated all of those children and their families and have produced a report that has some recommendations for government to improve things for those children. So they need more eyes on them, they need to be able to be encouraged and advocated for, but also they face barriers to access health services, educational services as well, and we're really shining a light that those children and young people need support, to get the support that they need, and where appropriate to return to school and education as well, to do the best that they can.
Because they are often a completely unseen, unheard group.
Yeah.
And you'll find the link to that report in the show notes. So, and you'll find
Dale.
the show notes wherever you listen to the podcast or on the Sendcast website. But that is going to be my Christmas reading, because that literally came out from the time of recording yesterday.
It did, yes, yeah, yesterday.
And it's always interesting. I do read. There's always the annual report from Ofsted, and I read it. And there is always, and again, when people say Ofsted are bad and evil, then literally I read these reports and I nod a lot, which generally means you're getting it. So it's like, I always sit there and go, if everyone's saying they're wrong, yet I'm reading a report and I completely agree with so much of what it said. Yeah, interesting.
And we'll keep going. We do the job to improve things for children, young people and their families, and in particular in the SEND sector, we all know things do need to shift dramatically to improve things for those young people, and we'll keep doing so.
Excellent. And for you listeners, thank you for listening to this show. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And you can find links to subscribe across the different platforms on our website. And if you love the show, share it with others. Get everyone listening. Now, everyone knows B Squared for helping schools to show the small steps of progress that pupils with SEND make. And over the last few years, we've been creating an inclusive assessment system that can be used with all pupils in primary schools, and this system has different levels of details for different levels of ability, but it means you can show progress from a starting point and identify gaps in learning for all pupils. And of course, using one system for assessment reduces teacher workload, and our new features to simplify reporting and our analysis platform help you understand your data for all your pupils. If you are interested and want to find out more, you'll find a link to the website and to book a meeting with me in the show notes. But for now, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Sendcast. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Bye everyone.